The elevator doors opened with a soft ding. A man in a maintenance uniform stepped out, holding a small lunchbox and a folded drawing his daughter made. He was supposed to fix a flickering light, not walk into a boardroom filled with executives. For a moment, everyone stared. On the projector, a $1 million problem blinked red. He hesitated at the door, then quietly said, "Your schematics upside down." The room fell silent, and that was how a janitor became the man who saved their company. Ethan Cole had learned to measure his life in small victories. A lunchbox packed without forgetting the juice box, Ava's shoes tied correctly on the first try, arriving at work only 5 minutes late instead of 15. At 36, he'd become an expert in the mathematics of survival, calculating exactly how many hours of sleep he could sacrifice, how many bills could wait another week, how many times he could smile through exhaustion before his daughter noticed something was wrong. The maintenance job at the corporate tower paid enough to keep their modest apartment, put food on the table, and occasionally afford the crayons Ava burned through like kindling. It wasn't the career he'd imagined during those late nights in engineering school. Blueprints spread across their kitchen table while his wife brought him coffee and kissed the top of his head. But that life had ended 3 years ago on a rain-slicked highway, and Ethan had learned that dreams were luxuries reserved for people who hadn't already lost everything. This particular Tuesday morning started like any other. He dropped Ava at school, her backpack nearly as large as she was, and listened to her chatter about the solar system project due Friday. She'd drawn him a picture during breakfast. Stick figures labeled Daddy and Me standing beside something that might have been a rocket or possibly a very tall giraffe. He'd folded it carefully into his pocket, next to the work order requesting a light bulb replacement on the 42nd floor. The Horizon Tech boardroom occupied the entire north side of the building, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a view of the city that made Ethan's stomach clench with vertigo. He knocked once softly, toolbox in hand, expecting an empty room. Instead, he walked into chaos. 12 executives in expensive suits crowded around a conference table, voices overlapping in barely controlled panic. A massive projection screen dominated one wall, displaying what Ethan immediately recognized as a turbine schematic, complex, color-coded, and completely wrong. "Excuse me," he said quietly. "I'm here about the light." No one heard him. A woman at the head of the table, tall, dark-haired, radiating the kind of confidence that came from never having packed a lunchbox at 5:30 in the morning, was speaking rapidly into her phone. "I don't care what the consultants say. We're 3 weeks behind schedule and burning through capital. If we can't solve this by Friday, the whole project gets scrapped." Ethan should have left, should have quietly replaced the bulb and disappeared back into the comfortable anonymity of hallways and maintenance closets. Instead, he found himself staring at the projection, his engineer's brain automatically rotating the image, checking calculations, identifying the error that should have been obvious. "Your schematic's upside down," he said, louder this time. The room fell silent. Every face turned toward him, expressions ranging from confusion to outright hostility. The woman at the head of the table, Claire Whitmore according to the nameplate, lowered her phone slowly. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "Maintenance. I'm here to fix the light." He gestured vaguely toward the flickering fluorescent above the table. "But your output ratio's reversed. The compression stage should feed into the secondary turbine, not bypass it. You're losing about 40% efficiency because the flow dynamics are backwards." Someone laughed, short and sharp. Richard, the deputy director, leaned back in his chair with a smirk. "The janitor thinks he knows turbine engineering. That's adorable." But Claire wasn't smiling. She studied Ethan with the intensity of someone who'd built a career on reading people, on knowing when to listen and when to dismiss. "Explain," she said simply. Ethan set down his toolbox, walked to the whiteboard, and for the next 2 minutes, muscle memory took over, his hand moving with the familiar precision of someone who'd once designed these exact systems, sketching flow paths and pressure gradients, explaining cascade ratios and thermal efficiency curves with the casual fluency of his first language. When he finished, the silence felt different, heavier, impressed. Claire looked at the whiteboard, then at the projection, then back at Ethan. "Who are you really?" "Just someone who fixes things," he said quietly, and picked up his toolbox to leave. Claire caught him in the hallway, her heels clicking against polished floors with the rhythm of someone who wasn't accustomed to chasing after people. "Wait, please." Ethan turned, toolbox still in hand, looking every bit the maintenance worker, except for the intelligence burning in his eyes. Something she'd missed at first glance, distracted by the uniform and the quiet demeanor. "Coffee?" she asked. "I'd like to understand what just happened in there." Ari, they ended up in the staff break room on the 41st floor, sitting across from each other at a small table with mismatched chairs. Claire had ordered her assistant to hold all calls, which apparently never happened, judging by the shocked look on the young man's face. "I wasn't always maintenance," Ethan said, hands wrapped around a paper cup that was too hot to drink from. "I used to design turbine systems, industrial grade, mostly, power generation, manufacturing facilities. It was a good job. I was good at it." "What happened?" He was quiet for a long moment, and Claire waited, sensing that pushing would only close doors she needed open. Outside the window, clouds were gathering, threatening rain. "My wife died 3 years ago. Car accident. I have a daughter, Ava. She was 3 when it happened." He took a breath, the kind that suggested he'd told this story before, but it never got easier. "After the funeral, I tried going back to work, tried pretending everything was normal. But Ava needed me, and I couldn't. I couldn't do both. The engineering job required travel, late nights, constant availability, so I left. Found something with regular hours, no overtime, no stress. Something that let me be there when she woke up and when she went to bed." Claire felt something shift in her chest. Respect, maybe, or recognition of a sacrifice she couldn't imagine making. "That must have been difficult. Equity, giving up the career or losing my wife?" "Both." "The career was easy," Ethan said simply. "Ava needed a parent more than I needed a title." They talked for an hour, then 2. Claire learned about his background, MIT engineering, 10 years at Bronson Industries designing the same systems Horizon Tech now struggled with. She learned about Ava's obsession with space, her collection of rock samples, the way she insisted on wearing her rain boots even on sunny days. And she found herself sharing things she rarely discussed. The pressure of running a company at 34, the constant battle to prove she deserved the CEO position her father had held before her, the loneliness that came with always being the smartest person in the room until you stopped trusting anyone's opinion but your own. When Ethan finally glanced at his watch and stood abruptly, apologizing for taking so much of her time, Claire made a decision. That evening, she was leaving late, as usual, when she spotted him in the lobby. Ethan stood by the glass doors, rain pouring outside, his daughter asleep against his shoulder. Ava couldn't have been more than 6, small and delicate, with crayon stains on her cheek and her arms wrapped trustingly around her father's neck. He was checking his phone, probably looking at bus schedules, his free hand gently rubbing circles on his daughter's back. Claire stood there watching, hidden partially by a support column, and felt something crack open inside her. The realization that while she'd been conquering boardrooms, this man had been conquering something infinitely more challenging. And he'd done it without complaint, without expecting recognition, without needing the world to witness his strength. The next morning, a visitor's badge arrived at the maintenance office addressed to Ethan Cole. The attached note in Claire's precise handwriting read simply, "Consultant, my office 9 a.m. Bring coffee." Over the following weeks, a strange routine developed. Ethan would arrive early before his maintenance shift and spend an hour with Claire's engineering team. He never took credit, never pushed to the front, just quietly identified problems and sketched solutions with the same efficiency he brought to replacing light bulbs and unclogging drains. The team grew to respect him, then rely on him, then genuinely like him. He had a way of explaining complex concepts that didn't make anyone feel stupid, a patience that came from spending his evenings answering a 6-year-old's infinite questions about why stars twinkled and how birds knew where to fly. Claire found herself looking forward to their morning coffee sessions, the way Ethan could make her laugh with stories about Ava's latest adventures, the rock museum taking over their living room, the elaborate blanket fort that had been standing for 3 weeks because Ava insisted it was load-bearing. He showed her drawings his daughter made, carefully preserved in his wallet, stick figures with wild smiles, buildings that defied physics, flowers with petals in every color. One morning, Ava came to the office, clutching Claire's hand while Ethan attended a meeting. The little girl studied everything with enormous eyes, asking questions about what every button did, whether Claire's computer could fly a rocket, if being a CEO meant you were the boss of the clouds. "Do you help my daddy fix things?" Ava asked, settling into an office chair that swallowed her small frame. "I try to," Claire replied. "Your dad's very good at fixing things." "See, he's the best," Ava said with absolute conviction, pulling out her own drawing to work on. Her daily ritual, Ethan had explained. He fixes everything, even when stuff is really, really broken. Claire watched the little girl color, tongue poking out in concentration, and thought about brokenness. How sometimes the people who looked most shattered were actually the strongest, held together by love and necessity and the quiet determination to keep going. That afternoon, she found herself drawing up official paperwork, changing Ethan's status from consultant to something more permanent, more valued. The visitor's badge had served its purpose, but it was time for something that reflected what he truly was: essential. The light bulb he'd come to replace that first day, the one he'd never actually fixed, still flickered occasionally above the boardroom table, and Claire found herself hoping it would keep flickering forever, a reminder of accidents and interruptions and the beautiful unpredictability of walking into the wrong room at exactly the right time. Richard had been watching, and Richard had been digging. Claire should have anticipated it. Her deputy director had always been ambitious, the kind of man who viewed every colleague as either a stepping stone or an obstacle. Ethan's growing influence threatened the careful hierarchy Richard had spent years constructing, the network of allies and favors that kept him positioned for the next promotion. The revelation came during a board meeting on a Thursday afternoon. Claire was presenting the quarterly projections, highlighting the turbine project's remarkable turnaround, when Richard cleared his throat with the practiced timing of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. "Before we celebrate too enthusiastically," he said, sliding a folder across the table, "I think the board should be aware of some concerning information about our new consultant." Claire's stomach dropped even before she opened the folder. Inside, newspaper clippings, accident reports, bankruptcy filings. Bronson Industries, Ethan's former employer, had collapsed 5 years ago after a catastrophic turbine failure at a manufacturing plant in Ohio. 3 people killed, 17 injured, millions in damages. The company had been sued into oblivion, its reputation destroyed, its engineers scattered to the winds, and there, in the list of senior design team members, Ethan Cole, "Our maintenance man turned miracle worker," Richard continued, his voice carrying just enough concern to sound reasonable rather than vindictive, "was part of the team that designed the system responsible for 3 deaths. I'm sure he didn't mention that during his coffee chats. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Someone asked if Ethan had been directly responsible. Richard shrugged. He was senior enough to sign off on the designs. Whether he personally caused the failure or simply failed to prevent it, he let the implication hang. Claire's mind raced. She'd done background checks, but they'd focused on criminal history and employment verification, standard procedure for a consultant position. She'd never thought to investigate deeper, never imagined there was something this significant hidden in Ethan's past. "Where is he now?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Maintenance closet on 37, I believe. Would you like me to escort him out?" "No." Claire stood, gathering the folder. "I'll handle this myself." She found Ethan exactly where Richard said he'd be, fixing a water fountain that had been dripping for weeks. He looked up when she approached, smile fading as he registered her expression. "We need to talk," she said. They went to her office and she laid out the folder without preamble. Watched his face as he looked through the contents. Saw something break behind his eyes. Not surprise, but resignation, as if he'd been waiting for this moment since the day he'd walked into that boardroom. "It's true," he said quietly. "All of it. I was on that design team. I signed those schematics. Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew how it would sound. Because I've spent 5 years trying to forget it happened. Because—" He stopped, jaw working. "Because 3 people died, Claire. Because my wife was one of them." The air went out of the room. Ethan sat down heavily, his hands shaking slightly. "She was touring the facility that day. The company sometimes brought spouses in, showed them what we were working on. She was so proud of what I did, always wanted to see the projects firsthand. And then the turbine failed, and the explosion? He couldn't finish. Claire felt her anger transforming into something more complicated: horror, sympathy, understanding. The report said the failure was due to a design flaw. It was, but not one I designed. Ethan looked up, meeting her eyes directly. 6 months before the accident, I identified a problem with the thermal expansion coefficients. The safety margins were too narrow. I filed 3 separate reports, escalated to senior management, even threatened to go to external regulators. They buried it, said fixing it would delay production and cost too much. Then they offered me a promotion to keep quiet. Did you take it? I was planning to resign, to go public if I had to, but I wanted to document everything first, build an ironclad case. I was supposed to meet with a lawyer the day after the accident. His laugh was bitter, broken. I survived because I'd taken the morning off to pick up Ava from her grandmother's. My wife went in my place. Irony's funny that way. Claire opened the folder again, searching through the pages with new urgency. Is any of this in the official records? Your warnings? The reports you filed? The company destroyed everything during bankruptcy proceedings. My word against theirs, and they had lawyers. I had grief and a 3-year-old daughter who kept asking when Mommy was coming home. He stood, pulling his maintenance badge from his pocket and setting it on her desk with careful precision. I should have told you from the beginning. I'm sorry I didn't. I'll clean out my locker and be gone within the hour. Wait, it's fine, Claire, really. This job gave me something I didn't know I needed. A reminder that I used to be good at this, that the part of me that understood engineering wasn't completely destroyed. Thank you for that. He was at the door when she said, "What if I don't want you to leave?" Ethan turned, confusion and hope warring in his expression. "What if I believe you?" Claire continued. "What if I think Richard's an ambitious snake who found your trauma and weaponized it? What if I want to fight for you? Why would you do that? Because I've spent 6 weeks watching you work. Because I've seen how you treat my engineers with respect, even when they don't deserve it. Because my company was failing before you walked into that boardroom, and now we're ahead of schedule." She stood, walking around her desk to face him directly. "Because Ava drew me a picture yesterday that said, 'Miss Claire fixes big machines,' and I don't want to disappoint her by being the CEO who gave up on her father." Ethan's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "The board won't accept it. Richard will make sure of that." "Then I'll get proof. The reports you filed still exist somewhere. Backups, email servers, someone's filing cabinet. And if they don't, I'll find the people you worked with, the ones who knew you tried to stop it. I'll build the case you never got to build." "Why?" "Because you didn't just fix our problem," Claire said quietly. "You saved us, and I don't abandon the people who saved me." That night, Claire worked until 3 in the morning, making calls, pulling strings, reaching out to former Bronson Industries employees through LinkedIn and industry contacts. She was the daughter of a CEO, which meant she understood something important. Power wasn't about having all the answers. It was about refusing to accept the wrong ones. By dawn, she had 5 sworn statements from Ethan's former colleagues confirming his warnings had been ignored. By noon, she had email backups from a sympathetic IT manager who'd kept copies of everything before the bankruptcy. By the board meeting at 3, she had enough evidence to not only exonerate Ethan, but to make Richard look like exactly what he was: someone willing to destroy a good man for political gain. She found Ethan in the parking lot, sitting in his old Honda, clearly having not gone home. When she knocked on the window, he looked up, exhausted and defeated. Claire held up a new badge. Not maintenance, not consultant, but something better. The title read, Chief Engineer, Horizon Tech. "You didn't fix a light bulb that day," she said when he rolled down the window. "You reminded me what integrity looks like. Now come back inside. We have work to do." Ethan's return to engineering wasn't triumphant. It was terrifying. The first morning back, he stood outside the engineering department at 7:30, coffee growing cold in his hand, unable to make himself walk through the door. 5 years of fixing leaky faucets and replacing light bulbs had created a comfortable barrier between himself and the career that had cost him everything. Now Claire was asking him to tear down that barrier, to risk feeling competent and valued and essential again. What if he'd forgotten everything? What if the trauma had broken something fundamental, some core piece of who he'd been before the accident? What if he failed and this time there was no excuse, No tragedy to hide behind. Just the simple, humiliating truth that he wasn't good enough anymore. Ava had kissed his cheek that morning and said, "You're going to be amazing, Daddy," with the absolute conviction only children possess. He'd held on to that certainty like a lifeline, and somehow it carried him through the door. The engineering team was waiting, arranged around the conference table with varying expressions of curiosity, skepticism, and in two cases, outright hostility. These were people who'd spent years earning their positions, collecting degrees and certifications, climbing corporate ladders rung by painful rung. And here was the janitor, suddenly elevated to chief engineer by executive fiat, skipping every step they'd struggled through. Ethan understood their resentment. He'd felt it himself once, in a different life, when the boss's nephew got promoted over more qualified candidates. He didn't blame them for doubting. "I know this is weird," he said simply, setting his coffee down and facing them directly. "I know you didn't ask for a new chief engineer, especially one who was fixing your toilets last week. I'm not here to prove I'm smarter than you or to throw my weight around. I'm here because Claire thinks I can help, and because I used to be pretty good at this before everything fell apart. If you'll let me, I'd like to try again." The honesty disarmed them, at least partially. People who expected arrogance didn't know how to process humility. Over the following weeks, Ethan earned their respect the old-fashioned way, by being patient, by listening more than talking, by rolling up his sleeves and working alongside them rather than above them. He set up his office simply. Desk, computer, whiteboard, and in the corner, his old maintenance toolbox. The younger engineers asked about it, assuming it was symbolic, some kind of metaphor about staying grounded. Ethan didn't correct them, but the truth was simpler. He kept it because fixing things, whether complex turbine systems or simple plumbing problems, gave him the same satisfaction. The scale didn't matter. The act of making something broken work again, that was what he'd always loved. Claire started bringing Ava to the office more frequently, partly out of necessity when after-school care fell through, but mostly because the little girl's presence changed the office energy in ways Claire hadn't anticipated. Ava would set up her coloring station in Ethan's office, chattering away about her day while he worked, and gradually the engineers started stopping by. At first to check on project details, but increasingly just to see what Ava was drawing, or to answer her endless questions about how computers worked, or whether robots could have feelings. One afternoon, Ava asked Claire directly, "Why did my daddy stop fixing lights?" They were in the break room, Ava swinging her legs from a chair that was too tall for her, destroying a chocolate chip cookie with systematic efficiency. Claire crouched down to eye level, considering the question seriously. "Because," she said carefully, "your daddy is really good at seeing problems other people miss. When he was fixing lights, he could only help one person at a time. Now he helps lots of people see things more clearly. It's a different kind of fixing, but it's just as important." Ava nodded solemnly, as if this made perfect sense. "Like how I help my friend Maya see that sharing makes everyone happier." "Exactly like that. Then I'm glad he's here. But I miss when he could fix my toy unicorn's wheel." Claire laughed. "I bet he still can. Some skills don't go away just because you get a fancy new job." That night, working late as usual, Claire found herself in the boardroom where this whole strange journey had started. The light bulb that had brought Ethan here in the first place glowed steadily overhead. He'd finally fixed it 2 weeks ago, unable to stand the flickering now that he walked past it daily. She stared at it, thinking about chaos theory, about how a single flickering light had redirected 2 lives, maybe 3 if you counted Ava. Ethan appeared in the doorway, jacket over his shoulder, clearly heading home but stopping when he saw her. "You're here late. Could say the same about you. Ava's at my sister's tonight, sleepover. I'm not used to the quiet anymore." Claire smiled. "Want to grab dinner? There's a Thai place 2 blocks over that's supposed to be decent." "Oh." They ended up talking until the restaurant closed, about everything and nothing, the turbine project's progress, Ava's upcoming birthday, Claire's complicated relationship with her father's legacy, Ethan's fear that he'd never fully trust his own judgment again after Bronson. Rain started falling gently against the windows, turning the city lights into watercolor blurs, and neither of them wanted to leave. Walking back to the parking garage, Claire's hand brushed against Ethan's, and he took it carefully, as if holding something precious and fragile. They didn't discuss it, didn't label it, just walked together under the same umbrella while rain whispered against fabric and the city hummed its endless song around them. Some repairs, Claire thought, happen so gradually you don't notice until suddenly the broken thing works again. 3 months later, Ethan found Ava at the kitchen table, surrounded by her usual chaos of crayons and markers, working on what appeared to be a masterpiece. He'd just gotten home from the office, loosening his tie, still strange, wearing ties again, and wondering what to make for dinner. "What you drawing, kiddo?" Ava looked up, grinning with that gap-toothed smile that made his heart hurt in the best way. "Our family, see?" She held up the paper proudly. 3 stick figures stood in front of a building labeled Daddy's Work in shaky letters. One tall figure clearly meant to be him, one small figure with pigtails representing Ava, and between them a third figure with long hair and what might have been a business suit or possibly a very elaborate dress. "That's Miss Claire," Ava explained unnecessarily. "She's part of us now, right?" Ethan sat down slowly, studying the drawing with the seriousness it deserved. "What makes you think that?" "Because she makes you smile the way you used to smile at Mommy in the pictures. Different, but the same kind of happy, and because she helped you remember how to fix the big things again." Ava returned to coloring, adding flowers around the figure's feet. "Plus, she promised to take me to the Science Museum, and only family makes promises like that." From the mouths of babes, Ethan thought, something warm and terrifying expanding in his chest. He'd been so careful, so controlled, keeping his growing feelings for Claire compartmentalized in the part of his brain labeled too complicated to address. But Ava had seen through him with the clarity of childhood, that unfiltered perception that cut through adult pretense like sunlight through fog. The truth was, Claire had become essential, not just to his career, though that was true, not just as Ava's friend, though watching them together made him ache with gratitude, but to him personally in ways he'd thought were permanently broken. She made him want to be better, braver, more willing to risk feeling everything he'd locked away after Sarah died. The next morning at work, Claire called him into her office. She looked nervous, which was unusual. Claire approached most situations with the confidence of someone who'd learned early that hesitation was weakness. "I've been offered a partnership opportunity," she said without preamble. "A colleague wants to start a new firm, specializing in sustainable energy systems. It's exciting, cutting-edge work, game-changing potentially." Ethan's stomach dropped. "That's amazing. Congratulations." "There's a position for a chief engineer, full partnership track, equity stake, the whole package." She paused, studying him. "I'm not taking it unless you come with me. Claire, I've spent 6 months rebuilding this company with you. I'm not interested in starting something new with anyone else. So either we do this together, or I stay here and we keep fixing what we've already built." She smiled slightly. "Ava drew me a picture yesterday, 3 people in front of a building. She said it was our family at Daddy's Work. I'm hoping she's a prophet." Ethan crossed the room, standing close enough to see the hope and fear competing in her eyes. "I need to be home by 6 for bedtime stories. That's non-negotiable." "Done. And Ava comes first always. If she's sick, if she has a school event, if she just needs me, obviously. And I'm terrified I'm going to mess this up, that I'll hurt you or fail you or prove I'm not ready for any of this." Claire took his hand, the same way he'd taken hers months ago in the rain. "Ethan, you walked into the wrong room and saved my company. You rebuilt yourself from grief and kept going for your daughter. You're the bravest person I know. So yes, you might mess up because humans do, but you'll also fix it because that's what you're good at. That's what we're both good at." He kissed her then, gentle and tentative, a question she answered by pulling him closer. When they broke apart, both smiling, Ethan realized this was what choosing looked like. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to be brave anyway. That evening, the 3 of them sat around Ethan's kitchen table, Ava between them, discussing the new venture with the seriousness of a board meeting. Ava voted yes, because adventures are better with friends, and Miss Claire is my best grown-up friend, except for Daddy. They ordered pizza, let Ava stay up past bedtime, and planned their future with the tentative excitement of people who'd learned that happy endings were possible, just rarely in the shape you'd expected. Later, after Ava finally crashed on the couch mid-sentence, Claire helped Ethan carry her to bed. Tucking in his daughter, smoothing hair from her forehead, he found the drawing from that morning carefully placed on Ava's nightstand. 3 figures, holding hands labeled, "We fix things together." He looked at Claire standing in the doorway and saw his future, complicated and uncertain, and absolutely worth the risk. "Welcome to the family," he whispered. She smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm. Inside, in a modest apartment that had held too much grief for too long, warmth returned slowly. A little girl dreamed of rockets and museums. A man who'd forgotten how to hope remembered. A woman who'd spent her life fixing companies learned to build a home. And somewhere, in a boardroom 42 floors up, a light bulb glowed steadily, never flickering again. A small miracle, born from walking into the wrong room at exactly the right time.